Hey, it's Thomas Mulready from CoolCleveland.com, and we're here today at Cleveland Public Library, and we're here with author Paula McLain. Thanks so much for taking time, Paula.
Absolutely, Thomas. Glad to be here.
You know, you are here to give a talk on your new novel, The Paris Wife, a novel.
A novel.
And it's important to say that because people might think it's a work of nonfiction. It's that real, and it's about a real period in Ernest Hemingway's life with his first wife, Hadley Richardson.
That's right.
Was it your idea to call it a novel as well, or did the editors say we have to put this in so there's no confusion?
It never occurred to me that
Really?
it would be anything other than a novel.
Right.
You know, biographies have been written about Hemingway, many wonderful
Oh,
biographies,
sure.
and he wrote about the time period himself.
Exactly.
Remarkably in A Movable Feast. So I felt like my job was to find another story, and part of that required me to invent it.
Yes.
Yeah.
You did invent it, but I wonder where that line is between what's real and what's not, because there's so many actual scenes, so much from his letters, so much from his biography, from A Movable Feast.
Exactly.
How much did you take liberties with the story itself?
I followed the historical record as a scaffolding, a kind of skeleton, if you
Right.
will, by reading the biographies, by reading his work, by obsessively kind of immersing myself into his fiction. So I knew the timeline,
Sure.
and I knew the story that I wanted to tell. And remember, it's not just a story of Hemingway's early days, inventing himself as a writer. It's a story of a marriage.
That's right.
It's a story of a marriage under siege from external forces and internal forces, and it's really a woman's story.
That's
so
right.
you think of it as A Movable Feast from Hadley's point of view,
From
the
her point
first
of view,
wife's
from his
point
wife.
of view. Exactly.
Let me ask you this, because it seems that the voice that you tell the novel in, which is basically Hadley's voice,
Right.
is very similar to what we know of as Ernest Hemingway's voice, the kind of writing, as you say, that he was teaching himself to write very spare, very sparse.
Understated, restrained, that kind of iceberg principle,
Yes.
so that there's more under the surface and it's charging everything by what's not said. It's economical.
It
Yeah.
is. And so that writing style you're actually attributing to Hadley. And I wonder if what you're saying in this sort of feminist way is that Ernest picked it up from her.
That's exactly what I'm saying. It's exactly what I'm saying. So when they met, he's 20 years old and she's 28, and he says, I think with you behind me, I could write a novel. And I want to start with real people just living their lives and saying things that they really mean to one another. And of course, the voice in his head, the deepest, kind of purest, most personal, intimate voice, is her voice. So that's what I want to show kind of subtly, that she's influencing his style just by being her person.
She was
you
very
know?
practical. She was very down to
Very
earth.
direct, super frank and candid. She says what she means. She's a straight shooter, and this becomes his model for the ideal woman.
So he picks up not only the vernacular and the voice, but the personality as well, which he became and made mythic in his life in the future.
Absolutely, but that her voice is in his head, and his voice is in her head, and they live in this private realm, and that gets sort of capitalized on when he begins to write his great novel.
They both had difficult childhoods, which you spell out in the novel. But you had a very difficult childhood, and in fact, it's, from what it sounds like, much more difficult than they had. They had a bit of privilege and some trust fund money.
Yeah.
How did the two, did they relate at all, or were you not concerned?
My story and their story?
Correct.
I think so, but first, I mean, it's kind of an eerie synchronicity that the two of them grow up with the same kind of overpowering, domineering,
Yes.
controlling mother, the same kind of passive, super sensitive, easily kind of manipulated father, that both of their fathers commit suicide in the same way.
Right.
And it's devastating, and I think it helps them understand one another in kind of a profound way.
Right.
And I think my growing up, I grew up in foster care in the 1970s and 80s, very difficult, dislocated, vulnerable, kind of like, I sometimes feel like a Holocaust victim, so I grew up in this incredibly painful way, and yet I think it helped me kind of hook in to their stories.
I imagine
Do you know
you
what
would.
I'm
Yes,
saying?
to
Yes.
where
And
they
Hadley
come
in
from.
particular had a lot of early pain and loss,
Right.
and that there was a part of herself that was waiting to blossom once she had moved out of the realm of influence of her
Right.
family life.
Right.
And I felt that was true for me as well.
Right.
And I feel like that was Ernest's story. He needed to reinvent himself by moving to Paris.
The three of you really came to this almost at the same time. You obviously, I think, probably had come to it earlier in your life, because by the time you wrote this, you were living
I've kind of come into my own already, professionally and personally, and didn't feel that. But those, it gives you a kind of understanding. Do you know what I mean? Like having that that point of view,
connection with your subjects.
Absolutely.
You are living in Cleveland now. Have you traveled to Paris? Have you been to France? You have.
I have. I've sort of done the Hemingway tour of France.
Did you
and
do that
Spain,
in preparation for this novel?
I did it sort of after I had already written the first draft, and it was a way of kind of honoring my experience with them, because I lived with them.
Yes.
You know, I transported myself back into this time
Physically,
and place,
almost.
Physically, emotionally, psychically, and it was a way to sort of further connect to their story, to stand outside of the apartment that they had first lived in, you know, in the Latin Quarter in Paris, and to sort of stand on the street of the Rue Descartes and look up at his studio, you know, where he sort of wrote overlooking all the rooftops of Paris, and
sit in the cafes, maybe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, try to get a feel.
The best gin and tonic of my life.
Yes.
One of his favorite cafes. Yeah.
And you also wrote in a cafe. It was a Starbucks, I understand, but not quite the cachet. But did you find the similarity there too? Do you think?
I think so. I didn't have a studio. I didn't have a place to work, but neither did he. You know, particularly when they moved back to Paris after they had their son Bumby. He has a child at home and can't find the physical, you know, kind of mental space to write. And that's I have 3 kids.
Same thing.
I have 3 kids. I can't get to the bathroom without my kids following me in there.
Right.
And so I needed to find whatever, a room of one's own, even if it's a little brown velveteen chair at the Starbucks at the corner.
It doesn't really matter, does it?
No,
as long as you have, and for you, listening to Nora Jones or what, I can't imagine what sitting in a Starbucks all day would be like, but you just need a space.
I'll tell you, everything dissolves. The walls dissolve, and the music, and the crazy guy, you know, there was you know, this and that, you know, the people being themselves in the coffee shop, and all of it would fall away, and there's this wonderful experience of lost time. And I'd look up and 5 hours had passed, and that was my work for today.
Tell me what it was like, because every writer's dream is what you just went through. You wrote a novel, you wrote a memoir, a couple books of poetry, but nowhere's near the success that you find. And here you had written this book, and all of a sudden, 6 different publishing houses were bidding for it. What did that feel like? What were you going through?
Well, it was the most exciting moment of my professional life. And also, it just felt like, you know, there's like the planets aligning. Yes. So this book that I loved more than life itself was actually going to live in the world and to have a reception that somebody who's going to put a great deal of energy and intention and enthusiasm behind it. It's the best possible story.
How does that work? Because you had a couple of publishing houses that took a chance on your work, did a good job, put the work out there.
But then it didn't hit. I mean, it's the thing, who knows? It's alchemy, you know, who knows what people love and why at any given moment, you know. But this book seems destined, you know, to find a home from the beginning, and that's very exciting.
You had some advice from, was it your agent, who, when you sent a draft of an earlier piece, said you're not really going to...
Please, God, don't write this book.
It was about a different book you were starting. But do you know where you're going next? Do you have a clear idea? I mean, how has this affected your choices going forward?
It sort of changed the game, really, for me. You know, my publishing career up to this moment has been a little schizophrenic. I went to school to write poetry. I have poetry collections. I have this memoir about growing up in foster care. I have a very lyrical first novel set in the 1970s, and then I have a historical novel about Ernest Hemingway.
Right.
Like, how do these things go together? I mean, they don't really.
Right.
But writing this book really changed the way that I think about my own writing process, and doing the research was so absolutely exciting and like completely delicious, and that was a real surprise for me to have that, to be transported to another time and place, to be getting this history lesson that was completely remarkable at the same time, to be absorbed kind of into the machinery of a story and to live inside of characters' heads that I didn't invent.
Instead of in your own head, where normally it's 100% made up stories and characters.
And the plot was kind of already there, or the skeleton of the plot was already there, and sort of my job was to fill it, you know, to fill it from the inside, and that was challenging in really spectacular ways.
Sounds like you didn't learn to write this way, because you took a lot of training. You've had a lot of fellowships, Yaddo, a lot of the writing colonies. You've gotten grants from Ohio Arts Council, National Endowment for the Arts. By the way, these are very much at risk right now with the current political climate. Do you have any comment on this? Because you are a good example of someone who our government has invested in through these grants.
Well, and how absolutely important it is for writers to have this support.
Yes.
And for to have there be a place that they can go and seek that support, particularly if they don't have the resources themselves, they don't have the time, they don't have the, you know what I mean? And they
Yes.
also don't have someone believing in them. A lot of times you just need another person saying, you can do this.
You're okay,
You know what
you're
I mean?
good.
You're getting this external validation.
Here's a few $100.
Absolutely.
It's not a lot of money.
Or airfare, or here's lunch in a basket, because you're doing this very important work. And if somebody believes in you, then you can begin to believe in yourself. And I think that's what happened to Hemingway. He believed that in Hadley he'd found this voice.
She was his National Endowment for the Arts grant in a way, because she kept encouraging him.
And she also supported him.
She
you know,
physically and-
she actually physically and emotionally supported him.
Financially.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Everyone needs that. Thank you so much for taking time,
It's
Paula.
been
We're
my
also very
pleasure.
proud of you here in Cleveland and nationally, internationally. This is a great book. I'm enjoying it tremendously. I'm a fan, just like you are, of anything Hemingway does. And to hear this perspective and what you've done with it is a real eye-opener. It really is, even after all these years.
Thanks so much.
Congratulations
It's been
for all
my
your
pleasure.
success.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Thomas Mulready from CoolCleveland.com. Have a great week in cool Cleveland.